If you think that Batman the Brave and the Bold is just a silly, colourful throwback to the Silver Age of comics, think again. Yes, there are aliens, musical numbers, and enough zany inventions to make any 1960s sci-fi fan grin, but buried beneath all that whimsy is a show that was just as happy exploring the supernatural. Take The Gentleman Ghost, for example. On paper, he's a polite, hat-tipping highwayman who became a ghost. On screen, he drags Batman into nightmare scenarios so dark that you might blink and wonder if you accidentally switched channels. The Brave and the Bold isn't just an homage, it's a masterclass in tonal range, a show that can make you laugh, gasp and shiver all in the same episode. And understanding how it does that starts with the ghosts it's willing to summon. Now, before getting to the animated version of The Gentleman Ghost, it's important to look back at the comic book original. The Gentleman Ghost first appeared in Flash Comics number 88, published in 1947. At the time, Flash comics weren't just about the Flash, it was an anthology book with a rotating stage of characters who couldn't quite carry their own series. Heroes like the Atom, Black Canary and Hawkman all took their turn in the spotlight, and it's in a Hawkman backup story that Gentleman Ghost makes his debut. From the very beginning, there was something off about him. These early stories never fully committed to the idea that the Gentleman Ghost was actually supernatural. Every eerie appearance and impossible escape came with a plausible explanation lurking just beneath the surface. Things like hidden projectors, clever recordings, suggesting that his whole thing was elaborate misdirection. He probably wasn't a ghost, he just wanted you to think that he was. At least that was the case until the Atom and Hawkman number 43, published in 1969, where they finally pulled back the curtain. The man behind the myth was James Craddock, an English highwayman who earned the nickname Gentleman Jim for the polite way he tipped his hat to his victims before robbing them blind. But the title was a lie. Craddock wasn't charming, he was indulgent and reckless, burning through stolen money on drunken ladies of the night. And like most men who live that way, he didn't fall in battle or go out in a blaze of glory. He was caught, tried, and sentenced to hang. As the noose tightened and the lever was pulled, Craddock made a promise to return and rob every soul who stood there to watch him die. And somehow, he kept it. His spirit tore free of the past and re-emerged 150 years later, drifting through the streets of a very different London. No longer flesh and blood, the gentleman thief had become the Gentleman Ghost. That version of the character carried over into the Super Friends, where, true to the show's format, he's reduced to a simple villain of the week. The most notable thing about him is that they didn't call him Gentleman Ghost, instead they stuck with the name Gentleman Jim. This seems to have been a stylistic decision rather than an act of censorship, although I'd forgive you for suspecting that, given that this was the same show that wanted to rename Darkseid because they thought his name sounded too frightening for children. His episode is called The Ghost, and he spends much of his time trying to turn world leaders into ghosts. Not by killing them though, it happens through a tap of his cane. All to get revenge on Superman and Wonder Woman, who had returned his body to the grave years earlier, condemning him. Now, I'm pretty certain he only appeared in this one episode, despite referencing an earlier adventure set in 1971, but I did go back through much of those earlier seasons and couldn't spot him. One thing that this version introduces, as far as I am aware, was the concept of Craddock's ghastly face phasing in and out for dramatic effect. I can't rule it out happening in another comic book, but some of his appearances are really hard to track down. Keep this in mind for later on because it will be important. Now, going back to the comics, perhaps something about his interactions with Batman in the Super Friends sparked an idea, because Gentleman Ghost officially became a Batman villain in Batman number 310, published in 1979. However, instead of a ghost pretending to be a man, he's presented as a man pretending to be a ghost again. Using holograms, tricks, and misdirection, the supernatural was reduced back down to stagecraft, although that version didn't last very long. In just a few issues later, Batman number 319, Batman uncovers the machinery behind the illusion and then comes face to face with Gentleman Ghost himself. And he is not a projection or a trick, he's an actual ghost that vanishes. It seems like Craddock just likes to mislead people, even in death. In 1992, he nearly found a place in Batman the Animated Series, but was ultimately cut. He is listed as a villain in the early Writer's Bible for the show, which was given to prospective writers to help them write scripts that matched the series' tone. However, once Alan Burnett came on board, most of that material in the Writer's Bible was scrapped. From then, the creative team wanted to avoid the supernatural, keep Gotham grounded, or at least as grounded as a city with a werebat, a zombie snowman, and a sentient pile of mud can be. Although, as the series went on, that rule did seem to become less strict. He eventually appeared in Justice League Unlimited, mostly in the background as part of Gorilla Grodd's expanded secret society, with a brief role in the episode Ancient History. And he's pretty faithful to the comic book version. He flies, phases through objects, and the only thing that can touch him is the nth metal weaponry wielded by Hawkman. But once he was caught, that was it. Now, if you're a fan of the character and wanted to see more of him, you would have had to have waited until 2008's Batman the Brave and the Bold. If you only think of Batman the Brave and the Bold as a love letter to the Silver Age of comics, a time focused on science fiction and absurd adventures, Gentleman Ghost exists to prove you wrong. I'd argue that, on the whole, The Brave and the Bold is the most diverse Batman show as it covered a lot of different genres. Yes, they had many Silver Age style adventures, but it also had musical numbers, dark, serious stories. And then you have the Gentleman Ghost episode in which the tone drops hard. His first major appearance opens with Batman chasing the flamboyant villain through a crowded festival, with Plastic Man turning the whole thing into a joke. Then Gentleman Ghost shows his true face. Think back to how he appeared in the Super Friends, a white face with big black eyes. Here, he's a rotting, snarling corpse, which is quite the step up. And then Batman falls into an open grave that had been dug specifically for him. Gentleman Ghost intended to bury him alive. Yeah, that's grim. Fortunately, fire arrived to help save the day. But Batman wouldn't be quite so lucky in the next Gentleman Ghost episode. This time, he succeeds in his plan, burying Batman alive. There's no punchline here to break the tension, instead it's just the soundless, suffocating reality of a hero who's running out of air, who can't move, and knows exactly how long he has left to live. Gentleman Ghost stories act as a vehicle to introduce some of the more supernatural characters in the DC universe too. To get back to the comic book history when the Silver Age ended in the late 1960s and the rules around the type of content that comics could show softened, one of the first things DC did was publish a series of horror characters. And what I really like is how The Brave and the Bold respects this part of DC's history too. Batman shows his vast skill set by projecting his soul from his body, using advanced meditation techniques to find a way out. And this brings us Deadman, a literal ghost guiding Batman's soul. Now, Deadman is a very cool character who I will probably make a video about one day. Do let me know if you want to see that. I may be able to bump it up the schedule if the demand is there, but he has a vital role in this episode. In short, Deadman was a circus acrobat who was killed mid-act, and his soul has been left wandering the earth. He has no idea why, but he has a purpose. While Batman was disposed of, the Gentleman Ghost has been collecting artifacts tied to his own death, in order to summon an army of the damned beneath London. They are skeletons clawing their way out of the earth. So there's no ambiguity here, no prospect of it all being an elaborate hoax. The Gentleman Ghost is a ghost, and he wants to get revenge on the City of London and Batman for their role in his downfall, and more on that in a few minutes. When Batman and Deadman track the Gentleman Ghost to the catacombs beneath the city, they come face to face with his spectral army, who try to drag Batman to hell. Earlier, Batman briefly had possessed Green Arrow's sidekick Speedy to get the Emerald Archer to free his body from the booby-trapped coffin. So once Batman was unearthed, Deadman went and took control of his body and returned with nth metal weapons to free Batman's spirit. From here, Batman returned to his own body and teamed up with the other heroes to foil Gentleman Ghost's scheme. When Batman destroys the relics that controlled the army, the once loyal soldiers drag the Gentleman Ghost to hell, where an appropriate punishment awaits him. I'm going to say that word again. Grim. Now, what's really interesting is how Gentleman Ghost's story is pretty much told in reverse. While he makes several background appearances in the show, we don't see his origin until later on. We know he wanted revenge on Batman, but he didn't explicitly say why. His next and final starring episode revealed all, and acted as a vehicle for introducing another of DC's Bronze Age horror characters, Etrigan the Demon. In 19th century London, Sherlock Holmes walks the streets and mobs burn supposed witches for a series of ghastly murders. In reality, the culprit is a highwayman named Jim Craddock, who seems to be a bit of a magician too. He has made a deal with the demon Astaroth, offering other people's souls in exchange for immortality. Jason Blood is accused of Craddock's crimes and, despite being proved innocent by Holmes, gets dragged off to be burned at the stake. Fortunately, Blood had set up a spell to bring Batman to that period in time to help save the day. And this episode is full of demonic nightmare fuel, demons clawing their way through the underworld, souls being torn from bodies, and a literal descent into hell. Of course, the heroes defeat Craddock and turn him in. Yet despite failing, he still manages to technically become an immortal, just not quite in the way he imagined. Once he is handed over to the police, he is tried, found guilty, and executed. From there, he rises from his grave as a ghost and swears vengeance on Batman. He knows that he's from the future and is more than willing to wait to get his revenge. And the funny thing is that Batman had tried to warn him. He tells him in plain English that his plan does not succeed and he will be doomed to walk the earth as a ghost for centuries. But Craddock doesn't believe him, and it's his arrogance that ultimately costs him his life. Yet he still blames Batman, and I guess that's why he's a villain. Ultimately, Gentleman Ghost acts as a way of taking Batman out of the bright, colourful world of the Silver Age homage and drops him into another legitimate era from his history. Which is why the idea that this show is just an homage to the Silver Age of comics doesn't really hold up. Yeah, it absolutely leans towards the zany sci-fi stories of that era more often than not. Yes, it is often very funny and enjoyable for younger audiences, but it also buries its hero alive and sends him to hell. And that is the genius of it. Even when the show dips into horror, it's still made for kids. Kids have a way of loving what scares them. The thrills, the shivers, and the suspense give the laughter that follows more bite. The brave and the bold understands that being spooked, just a little, is part of the fun. I don't think that the Gentleman Ghost is there to traumatize anyone. He's there to give young viewers a safe taste of danger. They can watch Batman being buried alive, stare at a rotting corpse, or follow souls dragged into the underworld and still know that in the end, justice will be served. It's the same reason that the show mixes musical numbers and aliens with demons and skeletal armies. Variety keeps it lively. So when Batman the Brave and the Bold leans into its horror characters, it's done to enhance the fun. It's letting children delight in fear, embrace the unknown, and feel the thrill of danger from the safety of their living room. That's why after all these years, Gentleman Ghost remains one of the most memorable villains. He reminds us that even in a bright, colourful world, shadows are also worth exploring. Okay, that's it for this essay. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really liked the video and feel like tossing a buck or two my way, please consider using the thanks button, because every little helps. And if you have really enjoyed my work, you might want to pick up a copy of my book, Rogues Gallery. It features 22 essays on villains from Batman the Animated Series. There's a beautiful cover by Batman the Animated Series background artist John Calmette, a foreword by director Dan Reber, and a moving segment from the late Kevin Conroy sharing his thoughts on life, love, and loss. Plus, an exclusive essay on the Condiment King that will never be made into a video. Rogues Gallery is available worldwide on Amazon, both digitally and in softcover. Finally, channel memberships are just $1.99 a month and give you early access to my essays, custom emojis, and your name featured on my members end screen, which has been rolling for a little while now. Huge thanks to everyone who's already part of this. You've helped to make these videos possible. If you want to see your name up here too, join the channel now. And while I have your attention, please consider checking out my other channel, Serum Lake Comics, where I talk about mostly DC comic books. Next time, when I return on Friday, we're going to discuss an original villain made for the Batman, who shows that sometimes we can be our own worst enemies. Yeah, we're going to talk about the Everywhere Man. And next Monday, I would like to discuss an early episode of Superman the Animated Series that introduces a very gropey villain, the Parasite. We're going to talk about feeding time. Hope to see you then.